The Nisari were a forgotten people, lost in the vastness of space. For centuries, their species had lived in isolation, rejected by the stars themselves. In the galaxy, where countless alien species thrived and flourished, the Nisari were an outcast. They were different, not only in appearance but in culture. Their skin shimmered with colors that other species found unsettling. Their eyes were wide and luminous, and their voices echoed in tones that were unfamiliar to many. The Nisari had once been part of a great alliance of planets, a proud species known for their intelligence and ability to harness the power of stars. But over time, their differences became too much for others to bear. The peaceful Nisari were seen as strange, their ways too mysterious and unknown. Slowly, one by one, the galactic empires closed their doors to them. Their resources were stolen, their knowledge ignored. The galaxy that had once welcomed them now turned its back. On a distant world, under the cold light of a dying sun, the Nisari held on to the last threads of their existence. The planet, once lush and full of life, was now barren. The air was thick with dust, and the water had long since dried up. The Nisari had been left with nothing. Only their hope remained, a faint and flickering dream that perhaps, just perhaps, another species might be kind enough to reach out. Their leaders, Therion and Era, stood atop the high cliffs of their homeworld, looking out at the stars. The sky was vast, empty, and silent. "Do you think they will hear us?" Era asked, her voice soft with uncertainty. Therion turned his gaze to the distant heavens. His people had tried everything. They had sent signals to the farthest corners of the galaxy, begging for help, pleading for someone to listen. But there had been nothing. No reply. Just silence. "We have no other choice," Therion said, his voice strong despite the doubt in his heart. "We must send the message again. Maybe, this time, someone will listen." Era nodded, though she did not believe it herself. The Nisari had been forgotten, ignored by the stars. Still, the tiny spark of hope inside her refused to die. She believed in the possibility, no matter how slim. And so, the Nisari sent out their message, a final plea for help. It was their last chance, and they knew it. The message was simple. "We are the Nisari. We are lost. We need your help." As the signal left their world, it traveled across the emptiness of space, hoping to find an ear, a hand, or even a glimmer of compassion. The message from the Nisari traveled through the cold emptiness of space, carrying their desperate plea. No one knew if it would reach anyone, and no one knew if anyone would care. But far away on Earth, a small group of scientists was about to change everything. Dr. Lucia Keller sat in front of a large screen in the control room of the Earth Space Observatory. She was the lead scientist, and her team had been working tirelessly to monitor space signals. Day after day, they observed the stars, hoping to discover something new. But they had never expected this. A sudden beep broke the quiet atmosphere. The signal had been detected. "What's this?" one of the technicians asked, his eyes wide with surprise. He typed quickly on his console, trying to trace the signal. It was faint, but it was definitely something. He turned to Dr. Keller, his face filled with excitement and confusion. "It's a signal from deep space. It's not from any known species." Dr. Keller leaned forward, her heart racing with curiosity. She studied the readings on the screen. The signal was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was simple, clear, and yet it carried a deep sense of urgency. The words were faint, but they were unmistakable. "We are the Nisari. We are lost. We need your help." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The words repeated in her mind. They were an alien species, in need of help, sending a signal to anyone who might listen. But who would answer? Humanity was still young in the cosmos, and they were far from being the dominant force among the stars. "Should we respond?" one of the team members asked, unsure of what to do. Dr. Keller didn't hesitate. She knew this was a rare and important moment. "We have to. We can't ignore them." They're reaching out, and we can't turn our backs on them." She gave the order to send a response. A team of specialists quickly worked to encode a message back to the Nisari. It was a simple message, humble, hopeful, and honest. "This is Earth. We are here. We will listen." As the message was transmitted back to the stars, Dr. Keller sat back in her chair. Her mind raced with thoughts of who the Nisari were, why they needed help, and what they might look like. She felt a strange connection to them, even though she had never met them. There was something deeply human about their plea, something that called out to her very core. "Do you think they'll respond?" asked one of the technicians. Dr. Keller nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. "I believe they will, and when they do, we'll be ready." As the seconds ticked by, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of relationship humanity would form with this forgotten species. The universe was vast, and the stars had ignored the Nisari for so long. But perhaps humanity could offer them something different, a chance for survival, a chance for hope. In the quiet of the observatory, all eyes were on the screen, waiting for the next signal. Would the Nisari answer back, or would they remain just another lost species in the dark void of space? The silence in the room was deafening, but in that silence, something changed. It wasn't just the stars that were silent anymore. The days that followed the transmission of the message were tense. Dr. Keller and her team waited anxiously, their eyes fixed on the screens in the Earth Space Observatory. Would the Nisari respond to humanity's offer? Or would their message be lost in the endless void of space, just another unanswered cry for help? For weeks, there was nothing but silence. Then, one evening, a soft beep echoed through the control room. The team froze. This time, it wasn't just background noise or an error in the system. The signal was back. Dr. Keller quickly stood and walked over to the console, her heart racing. The technician working the controls checked the data and turned to her. "It's them," he said quietly. "They've responded." The message was simple but unmistakable. It read, "We hear you. We are coming." The words sent a ripple of shock through the room. The Nisari were answering. After all the years of being ignored, they were finally making contact with humanity. But how would this encounter go? The Nisari were a species no one knew much about, and their reputation across the galaxy was not one of peace. Dr. Keller felt a surge of both excitement and uncertainty. This was the moment she had hoped for, but it was also the beginning of something much larger and far more complex. She knew that first contact with an alien species was never easy. There would be risks, misunderstandings, and challenges ahead. "Prepare the team," Dr. Keller ordered. "We need to meet them. This is a moment for humanity's history." The next few days were a blur of preparations. A team of diplomats, scientists, and astronauts was assembled. Dr. Keller, being the one to lead the initial communication, was also selected to travel with the team. They would meet the Nisari on a neutral location, a space station just outside the orbit of Mars, where both species could meet safely. As the day of departure drew near, Dr. Keller found herself thinking about the Nisari more and more. What would they look like? What would they be like? She had read the few ancient texts that mentioned them, but nothing concrete. The galaxy had long cast them aside, and now they were coming to Earth, reaching out for the first time in ages. The morning of the meeting, Dr. Keller stood at the docking bay, watching the massive space shuttle prepare for launch. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Around her, the team was silent, each of them lost in their thoughts. No one knew what to expect, but everyone understood how important this moment was. The Nisari ship was on its way, and soon, humanity would come face to face with a species that had once been forgotten. The stars had long ignored the Nisari. Now, humanity would give them the chance they had been waiting for. The day arrived, and the tension was palpable. Dr. Keller stood at the observation window of the space station, gazing out at the vastness of space. She had waited for this moment for so long, this chance to make a difference, to bridge the gap between two species that had never met before. She knew the stakes were high. What if things went wrong? What if the Nisari didn't trust them? What if they weren't willing to cooperate? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she refused to let fear control her. This was humanity's opportunity to make a mark in the galaxy, to show that compassion and unity were more powerful than hatred and distrust. Dr. Keller, a voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see Commander Thompson, the leader of the space station's security team. Everything is ready. The Nisari ship is on its way. Dr. Keller nodded, her mind racing. The Nisari ship was expected to arrive within the hour, and everything had been prepared for their first official meeting. The team had worked tirelessly to ensure that the space station was equipped with everything necessary for a peaceful encounter. As the time grew closer, Dr. Keller couldn't help but wonder what the Nisari would be like. She had spent hours reading about them, trying to understand their culture, their values, their struggles. But there was so little known about them. They were a mysterious people, and now they were coming to meet humanity face to face. Finally, the countdown began. The large doors of the spaceport slid open, and the Nisari ship slowly glided into the docking bay. Dr. Keller watched with a mixture of awe and curiosity as the sleek, silver vessel approached. Its design was unlike any other ship she had ever seen, smooth, elegant, and alien in the truest sense of the word. The ship's engines hummed softly as it docked, and for a few moments there was complete silence. Then, the airlock door on the Nisari ship slowly opened. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the ship, tall and graceful. Her skin shimmered in hues of deep blue and violet, and her large, luminous eyes locked onto Dr. Keller. She was unlike any human, and yet there was something profoundly familiar about her. Her presence exuded strength and elegance, yet there was a sadness in her eyes that spoke volumes. "This is Era," Therian's voice came from behind her. The Nisari leader had followed closely behind the figure, his posture commanding but his expression weary. "She is my ambassador, and the first to meet with you." Era stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Dr. Keller's. "We did not expect this." Era's voice was melodic yet strong, carrying a hint of surprise. "But we are grateful. We have long been rejected, and to find someone willing to listen is a new hope." Dr. Keller stepped forward, extending her hand in a gesture of peace. "We're here to help. Humanity has not forgotten you." Era paused for a moment, as if considering the gesture, then slowly reached out and accepted Dr. Keller's hand. "Then let us begin," Era said quietly. The exchange was brief, but in that moment, Dr. Keller felt something shift. The beginning of a new bond, fragile but real, had been formed between the two species. There was still much to understand, many challenges ahead. But in this first handshake, there was a promise, an unspoken agreement that together, humanity and the Nisari would face the future hand in hand. The first meeting between the humans and the Nisari had been successful. Dr. Keller couldn't help but feel a sense of relief as she walked back to her quarters, her mind still buzzing with the events of the day. Era, the Nisari ambassador, had extended a hand of peace, and humanity had accepted it. But peace was not something easily won. The journey ahead was far from guaranteed. The next day, the Nisari ambassador and her people gathered with the humans in the conference room aboard the space station. Dr. Keller, along with a team of scientists and diplomats, were there to discuss the next steps. The stakes were high. This was their chance to prove that humanity could help the Nisari, to show that they weren't just offering empty promises. "We understand your desperation," Dr. Keller said as she addressed the Nisari delegation, Era by her side. "We want to help. We have resources, technology, knowledge. We are offering everything we can to help your people." Era looked at her, her large eyes full of both hope and skepticism. "Your offer is generous," she said slowly. "But what are you expecting in return?" Dr. Keller hesitated. "It was a good question. We want to help you rebuild. Humanity has faced hardship before and survived. We believe that, together, We can make a difference for your people." Era nodded but didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned to Therion, who was standing silently behind her. The Nisari leader was deep in thought, his eyes distant. He had been quiet since their arrival, and Dr. Keller could sense his unease. The Nisari were not a trusting species, and their past experiences with other civilizations made them wary of any offer, no matter how kind it seemed. "Therion." Era spoke softly. "What do you think?" Therion looked up, his gaze meeting Dr. Keller's. "We've been betrayed before. Every promise, every offer. They all turned out to be lies." His voice was rough with emotion. "How can we trust you?" The room fell silent. Dr. Keller could feel the weight of his words. She knew they had to prove their sincerity. "But how?" "We don't expect you to trust us immediately," she said finally. "It will take time. But we can show you that our offer is genuine. We can start small. Help with the basic needs of your people. Water, shelter, food. Once you see our actions, I hope you'll come to understand that we want nothing more than to see your species thrive again." Era's gaze softened, but Therion remained guarded. "Your words are kind, but words alone will not be enough," he replied. "We need to see your actions." Dr. Keller nodded. "Then let's begin." Over the next few weeks, humanity began delivering resources to the Nisari: water filtration systems, food supplies, and technology to help restore their decimated planet. The process wasn't easy. The Nisari were still cautious, watching every move the humans made, unsure of what their true intentions were. Despite the skepticism, Dr. Keller felt a growing sense of hope. She saw the Nisari starting to trust them, even if just a little. But it was a start, and for the first time in many years, the Nisari had something they hadn't had before: a chance. Era stood beside Dr. Keller as they watched the Nisari workers begin to rebuild their homes with the new materials. "This is just the beginning," Era said quietly. "But it is a beginning." Dr. Keller smiled. "Yes, it is." The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like humanity and the Nisari were walking it together. As the days passed, the relationship between humanity and the Nisari slowly began to grow. Dr. Keller observed from the sidelines, watching the gradual changes with a mixture of hope and caution. The Nisari were still wary, but the food and water supplies humanity had provided were making a noticeable difference. The once dying cities of the Nisari were starting to come back to life. But the true test was coming. A new threat loomed on the horizon. Humanity had helped the Nisari with their most urgent needs, but now it was time to prove that this alliance was more than just a temporary fix. The Nisari had a long-standing enemy, a warlike species known as the Xelrith, who had raided their colonies for centuries. These violent aliens had left the Nisari in ruins, and their presence was a constant reminder of the danger they faced. "We can't ignore the Xelrith any longer," Therion had said in a private meeting with Dr. Keller. "They will come again. They always do." Dr. Keller had known this day would come. The Nisari needed protection, and they needed it fast. But humanity was not yet equipped to fight an enemy like the Xelrith. Earth had made some progress in space travel and defense, but they were still far behind the more advanced species of the galaxy. "We're not ready," Dr. Keller said, her voice filled with concern. "We can help with technology and defense, but we don't have the military strength to fight off an invasion." Therion's eyes darkened. "Then what are we supposed to do? Wait for them to destroy everything we've worked for?" Dr. Keller knew the answer. Humanity's role in the galaxy was not just about survival. It was about innovation, about finding new ways to face challenges, even when the odds seemed impossible. But this time, it wouldn't be easy. The Xelrith were ruthless. "We have to do this together," Dr. Keller said firmly. "Humanity may not have the power of a warrior species, but we have something just as important: creativity, ingenuity, and the ability to adapt." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Keller and her team worked tirelessly to develop a plan to defend the Nisari from the Xelrith. With the help of the Nisari's advanced knowledge of their planet's defenses and humanity's resourcefulness, they created a strategy that relied on both sides working together, combining the Nisari's strength and the human ability to think outside the box. The day of the test arrived. The Tselrith ship appeared on the edge of Nisari space, a massive, menacing vessel that dwarfed anything humanity had ever encountered. The Nisari gathered in their defensive positions, while humanity's team readied their new technologies. "We can't fail," Era said, her voice tinged with anxiety. She stood next to Dr. Keller, her eyes fixed on the screen showing the incoming Tselrith ship. "This is our chance to prove we can survive." Dr. Keller nodded, her hand resting on the console. "We will survive. We'll show them that unity is stronger than anything else." As the Tselrith ship entered Nisari space, it didn't take long for the battle to begin. The humans and Nisari worked side by side, activating new defense systems and coordinating attacks. The strategy was risky, but it was their best chance. The Tselrith ships were powerful, but they had never faced an enemy that combined human innovation and Nisari strength. The battle was intense, the sounds of laser fire and explosions filling the air as both sides fought with everything they had. But slowly, humanity's and the Nisari's combined forces began to push the Tselrith back. Their ships were fast, their defenses strong, but they were not prepared for the clever tactics that Dr. Keller and Era had devised. Finally, after hours of fighting, the Tselrith retreat. The Nisari and humans had held their ground. As the dust settled, Dr. Keller exhaled, her heart racing. "We did it." Era smiled, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and relief. "We did it. Together." The test had been passed. Humanity and the Nisari had come together to defeat a common enemy, proving that their alliance was not just a hopeful dream, but a real and powerful force. The battle was over, but the journey was just beginning. The two species now knew that when they stood together, they were unstoppable. The battle against the Tselrith had been a victory. The alliance between humanity and the Nisari had proven its strength. But in the midst of that victory, a shadow had crept in, a crack in the foundation that neither Dr. Keller nor Therian had expected. The Nisari, once a fractured people, had started to unite. But now, there was a dark secret lurking within their ranks. The days following the battle were filled with celebrations and gratitude. Both species had worked together, and it felt like they were on the edge of something truly special. But even as they rebuilt, something felt off. Dr. Keller had noticed it first. The quiet whispers in the corners, the looks exchanged behind closed doors. She could sense the growing tension among the Nisari leadership. "What's wrong?" she had asked Era one evening after a long day of work. Era had been distant, her usual calm demeanor replaced with an anxious energy. Era hesitated before answering, her eyes flickering with doubt. "There are those within our people who believe we should not trust the humans fully. There are those who think we have been too quick to depend on outsiders." Dr. Keller's heart sank. She had feared this. Trust was fragile, especially after the Nisari's long history of betrayal by other species. She had hoped the victories, the cooperation, would silence those doubts, but it seemed that wasn't the case. The next morning, Dr. Keller received an urgent message from Therian. His face was grim as he appeared on the screen. "We need to talk, Dr. Keller," Therian said, his voice tight with tension. "There has been a betrayal." Dr. Keller's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "A faction of our people, led by one of our high-ranking officers, has made contact with the Tselrith. They've promised to end the alliance with humanity in exchange for power. They believe that Tselrith will help them restore the Nisari to their former glory." The shock hit Dr. Keller like a physical blow. "What? But why? After everything we've been through together." "Some of my people cannot forget the old ways," Therian replied, his eyes hard. "The Tselrith were never just enemies to us. Some Nisari saw them as a means to an end. They see the humans as weak. They believe our true strength lies in reclaiming what we once had, even if that means making deals with those who caused us so much pain. Dr. Keller was silent for a moment, struggling to process the news. How could the Nisari, after all that had happened, turn against them now? It seemed impossible. "This cannot stand," Dr. Keller said, her voice filled with determination. "We've come too far, and we can't let this alliance fall apart. We need to act now." Therian nodded. "I know. I have already begun tracking down the traitors. I will not let them sabotage everything we've worked for. But we need to be careful. If we make a wrong move, the entire alliance could collapse." Dr. Keller looked out at the stars through the window, her mind racing. This betrayal was a blow to everything they had worked for. But they couldn't let it destroy the hope they had built together. The trust between humanity and the Nisari was fragile, but if they were going to save it, they would have to act fast. "We'll stand by you, Therian," Dr. Keller said firmly. "Together, we'll root out the traitors and make sure this alliance stays strong." As the screen went dark, Dr. Keller knew that the road ahead was about to get much harder. The Nisari had been betrayed once before, and now it seemed they were on the edge of doing the same to humanity. But Dr. Keller refused to give up. The stakes had never been higher. This was a test of loyalty, of trust, and humanity would not back down. The days after the betrayal were filled with urgency. Dr. Keller knew that the fragile bond between humanity and the Nisari was on the verge of breaking. The traitors within the Nisari ranks had already made contact with the Xel'Rith, and soon they would begin their efforts to tear apart the alliance. The trust that had taken so long to build was being tested in the most difficult way possible. Therian had been working day and night to track down the traitors, but the task was not easy. The Nisari had their own ways of communicating and their own hidden factions. Dr. Keller knew that the traitors would be difficult to find. They were clever, and they were desperate. If they weren't stopped soon, they would drag both humanity and the Nisari into a war that neither could afford. "I can't believe this is happening," Dr. Keller muttered to herself one evening as she reviewed the data. "We were so close to something good, and now it's falling apart." Era, who had been working alongside her, looked over with a heavy heart. "It's hard to understand," Era said quietly. "But fear and old wounds run deep in my people. Some can't see beyond the scars of the past." Dr. Keller nodded. "That's what makes this so hard. We're not just fighting the Xel'Rith. We're fighting the ghosts of the Nisari's history, too." The Nisari were still recovering from their long years of war and isolation. They had learned to fear, to distrust. But humanity had shown them that there was hope in unity. Now, it seemed that fear was pulling them back into the darkness. "We can't let them win," Dr. Keller said, her voice filled with determination. "We have to show the Nisari that humanity is worth trusting, that we will not betray them." It wasn't long before Therian reached out with an update. "I've located the traitors," he said, his voice grim. "They're planning to meet with the Xel'Rith forces in a hidden space station on the edge of Nisari space. We have to move quickly." Dr. Keller and her team gathered, preparing to confront the traitors and stop them before they could do any more damage. It was a risky move. If the traitors knew they were coming, they could trigger a full-blown conflict between the two species. But Dr. Keller knew that they had no other choice. "We can't let the Nisari fall back into the hands of their past," Dr. Keller said as she looked over her team. "We have to protect them, even if they don't realize yet that they need our help." The journey to the hidden space station was tense. As the small human ship neared the coordinates Therian had provided, Dr. Keller couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to do. They weren't just stopping a dangerous alliance with the Xel'Rith, they were standing up for the future of two species that had so much to gain from working together. When they arrived at the station, the tension was thick in the air. The traitors were already inside, preparing for the meeting with the Xel'Rith. Dr. Keller's team approached cautiously, knowing that a wrong move could set everything on fire. "We can't hesitate." Therian's voice came over the comms. "We need to act now." With that, Dr. Keller gave the order. The team stormed into the space station, confronting the traitors head-on. It was a battle of words and action. The traitors fought for their power, trying to convince their own people that humanity could never be trusted. But Dr. Keller and Therian were ready for this moment. "We are not the enemies you think we are," Dr. Keller shouted over the noise of the confrontation. "We are offering something more: peace, unity, and a future where neither of us has to fight alone." The traitors hesitated, but just for a moment. Then, with the help of Therian and Era, the Nisari who had remained loyal joined forces with humanity. The traitors were captured, and the meeting with the Accelrith was averted. As the space station fell silent, Dr. Keller let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We did it." Era stepped up to her side, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "The future is still uncertain," she said softly. "But this is a victory. Together, we've taken a stand." Therian, now standing beside them, nodded. "The Nisari will not fall back into the darkness. We have seen the strength in unity, and now we know it's the only path forward." The traitors had been stopped, but the journey was far from over. The alliance between humanity and the Nisari was not just about overcoming external enemies. It was about building trust and learning to move forward together despite the past. The battle for trust had been won, but now it was time to truly unite. The space station was quiet once the traitors had been dealt with. The hum of the engines, the usual sounds of activity, had all faded into the background. But in the silence, a new sense of hope had begun to take root. Humanity and the Nisari had faced their greatest test, and now they stood stronger because of it. Dr. Keller stood by the observation window, looking out at the stars. Her mind was full of thoughts. The road ahead would not be easy. The galaxy was vast, and many challenges awaited. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. The alliance between humanity and the Nisari had been through a trial by fire, but it had survived. It was not perfect, and there were still doubts to overcome, but it was real. The Nisari had been betrayed by their own people, and yet they had chosen to stand with humanity. Therian and Era, once uncertain, had now become steadfast allies. Together, they had stopped the traitors and ensured that their future was not controlled by the mistakes of the past. Era walked over and stood next to Dr. Keller, her eyes still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "We've come far," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "But I know the journey is just beginning." Dr. Keller turned to face her, a smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, but we're in this together. That's the most important thing." Era nodded, her gaze turning toward the stars. "My people, we've been alone for so long. It's hard to believe that anyone would help us. But now we have hope. You've shown us that." Dr. Keller's smile grew. "We didn't do it alone. You helped us just as much." Therian entered the room, his usual stoic expression softened with a hint of relief. "The traitors have been removed," he said. "It's over. For now." "But it's only the beginning," Dr. Keller replied, turning back to face the window. "We've taken the first step towards something new, but we have to build on it. The Accelrith are still out there, and there are many other challenges we'll face together. This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about creating a future where we can both thrive." Therian stepped closer, his voice steady but filled with determination. "You're right. There will be more battles ahead. But for the first time in many years, I see a future for my people. I see a way forward. And that future will not be shaped by fear." The weight of his words hung in the air. The Nisari had lived in fear for so long, haunted by their past, their losses and their enemies. But now, they had a choice. They had hope, and with it, a chance to build a future not alone, but alongside humanity. Era stepped forward, her voice firm. "We will rebuild together. We will learn from our mistakes, and we will grow stronger." Dr. Keller nodded. "That's the spirit. No more hiding in the shadows. It's time to step into the light. The next few days were filled with planning and preparation. Humanity and the Nisari worked side by side to rebuild what had been lost and strengthen their alliance. They knew there would be struggles ahead, but they also knew they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that made all the difference. As Dr. Keller walked through the space station one final time before the next step in their journey, she looked at the faces of the Nisari, at the faces of those who had once believed they were forgotten by the stars. Now, they stood united with humanity, ready to face whatever came next. The stars, once silent, no longer seemed so far away. Together, they could reach them. The days after the battle with the traitors were full of rebuilding and reflection. The space station, once a symbol of uncertainty, had now become a place of unity. Humans and Nisari worked together, side by side, to repair the damage done and lay the groundwork for a future of cooperation. The trust between them had been tested, but it had survived. And now both species stood at the threshold of something new. Dr. Keller walked through the bustling halls of the space station, her mind filled with thoughts of the journey ahead. It had been a difficult road, but they had come so far. The Nisari had faced betrayal from within their own ranks, but they had chosen to stand with humanity. And humanity had proven that they could be trusted. Her steps slowed as she passed a group of Nisari children, their bright eyes full of curiosity as they watched the humans and Nisari workers. The future, once so uncertain for the Nisari, now seemed full of possibilities. Dr. Keller smiled as she watched them, a feeling of warmth spreading through her chest. She knew that this was just the beginning. Together, they had built something worth protecting. Therian appeared at her side, his expression calm but resolute. "We've made great progress," he said, his voice steady. "But there is still much to do." Dr. Keller nodded. "Yes, there's always more work ahead, but we've come this far. And that means we're capable of so much more." Era joined them, her face full of quiet determination. "The Nisari have always been a people of strength, but now we have allies. Together, we can rise above the fear that has held us back for so long." "We'll rise together," Dr. Keller said. "We've already proven that we can do it." The three of them stood together, watching the station's activity. Humans and Nisari were working as one, each learning from the other, each contributing their own strengths to build something greater than themselves. It was a partnership forged in the fires of struggle, but now it was stronger than ever. As the sun set beyond the stars, the quiet hum of the station filled the air. Dr. Keller's thoughts drifted to the future. The road ahead would not be without challenges. The Xelrith still lurked on the edge of Nisari space, and other threats remained. But for the first time, she felt that the galaxy held a future full of promise for both humanity and the Nisari. "Do you think they'll hear us?" Era asked softly, her gaze fixed on the stars. Dr. Keller smiled, the warmth of her hope shining through. "I think the stars are already listening. And they're not so silent anymore." The message had been sent. The alliance between humanity and the Nisari had been forged, not in the void of space, but in the hearts of those who believed in a future where cooperation, not fear, would shape the galaxy. The stars may have been silent for so long, but now they were filled with the promise of a new beginning. Together, humanity and the Nisari would face whatever came next. They had each other, and that made them stronger than anything the galaxy could throw at them. The stars, once silent, were no longer alone, and neither were humanity and the Nisari.